if you click right where the sphere is, you can drag that toolbar around, okay? And you can reposition on your screen if you want to get it out of the way so you can see the bottom of London Architect. That little toolbar also gives you access to a couple of things you might need during the class. Well, actually only one thing you really need during this part of the class. The fourth icon from the left looks like a little word balloon from a cartoon or a comic strip. If you click on that, it'll bring up the chat window. You can move the chat window around, drag it around your screen, whatever you want to do with it. You can also close it again, and then the button will reappear, and you'll be able to reopen it and close it as needed. So if you have any questions during the class, just click on that icon, pop open the chat window, and type in your question. Now, be aware of the fact that when your question is typed in, I get a little ding in my headphones. So I will be aware of your question. I won't necessarily answer your question the instant you ask it, because I may be planning on answering it in a couple minutes anyhow, in the normal flow of discussing the objects. So don't be offended if I don't immediately jump to your question. We have one more latecomer who appears to be stuck out there in La La Land. Let's crash back out to the main window, and then we'll come back in here, just to make sure Charlie can catch up if possible. Let's do that. Charlie can see that. There, Charlie's got his audio drivers loaded. Charlie, if you can hear me, up by the list of names, you'll see a button below the list of names in the top right corner. The button has a green check mark on it. Go ahead and hit that green check mark if you would. Just so I can tell you can hear me. Just so I know your audio is working. Or find out that it's not working and we're all stuck here again. No, it should be working. You'll hear me any second now, I'm sure. Top corner of the screen, Charlie, there's a window called the Participants Panel. Has a list of names in it. At the bottom of that list of names is a series of buttons. One of those buttons is a green check mark. Click on the button with the green check mark, please. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's everybody, so let's get this ball rolling. Again, as we're going through this, guys, feel free to ask questions. If you have a question, the little icon in the bottom right corner of your screen that looks like a cartoon word bubble. Click on that icon, it'll pop the chat window open. You can ask whatever you want. All right. Let me get my windows set properly on my screen so I can see them on both monitors. And I apologize for anybody who had adjusted their monitor for bigger than 1280 by 1024. See, there's your full screen toggle. If you click on the sharing button, click on view, click on autofit, it might improve your view. It might also make it horrible. So totally up to you to choose which one you like best. All right. Now, processing objects are available in the hardware tree. They're also available on a right click. And you can skip the macro dynamics and WAMCO tunings because those are macros that are on my computer. They don't count. But the processing objects are arranged basically into some essential groups. And some of the things, the groupings get a little vague towards the bottom. You know, matrices are kind of mixers, but they're kind of not. That's why they get their own category. The top of the list, by virtue of being at the top of the list, because it's not alphabetical, the top of the list is the dynamics processing. And dynamics processing involves compressors and limiters and all the stuff that, affects dynamics. The most basic, the thing we play with the most, is the compressor. Compressor in London Architect is, let me split my screen like that. Compressor in London Architect is actually one of the first things that ever impressed me about a SoundWeb product. I shouldn't say in London Architect. The BSS compressors. One of my first exposures to SoundWeb years ago was listening to the compressors in SoundWeb and being asked to help set up some compressors on some vocal mics. And I was blown away. I was absolutely stunned by how good they sounded. Stunned by how analog they sounded, for lack of a better term. You know, they didn't sound like the nasty compressors I'd gotten used to hearing in other inexpensive DSP products. The compressor in Sound of London is modeled after the algorithm that was in Sound of Green. We have it here in a couple of flavors, mono and stereo. They both have the same control panel. The odd bit about the compressor, I don't know anyone who actually does this, but if you want, you can grab the knee over here in the display and move the knee around, which changes the threshold point. You can also grab, I don't even know what this bit is called, but you can grab the end of the scale and change the ratio dynamically. Now, I've never quite figured out what the advantage is to grabbing the control surface over here as opposed to just grabbing the ratio knob, but they both work. They both have the same effect. Okay. The compressor in there you go. The compressor in SoundWave does have a sidechain input, which a lot of people don't realize, don't bother to even take a look at. If you don't know what a sidechain is, you could be in for a treat then. It could be a lot of fun stuff with sidechain inputs. Basically, if you turn on, let's start over. If you turn off the sidechain, if there's no sidechain turned on, then the compression circuit is triggered by the audio coming into the compressor, and it's acting upon the audio in the compressor. If I turn on the sidechain, now the compression circuit is acting on the audio coming into the compressor, but it's being triggered by the audio coming into the sidechain. So it'll compress channel 1 based on the signal on channel 2, which you can do all kinds of funky cool stuff with. Lots of fun toys there. Same deal with the stereo compressor. It has a single side chain. It's not a left side chain and a right side chain. It's just a single side chain that triggers both sides. When you have the side chain turned on, the compressor no longer triggers off of its primary input. So you can't use the primary and the side chain both unless you put a mixer ahead of it and mix the primary signal in with whatever you're going to side chain. Okay, there's no internal way to mix them together. Also in the realm of dynamics, oh, I apologize, I should have left that up there actually. Let's put the compressor back there. The compressor and the expander are often misunderstood, or I should say the expander is misunderstood because of the compressor. People expect or think that the expander will be a variation on the compressor, and it's not at all. What does the compressor do? The compressor takes the signal, the incoming signal, and when that signal is below a threshold, that threshold is set here, nothing happens. When the signal is above the threshold, the compressor will compress that signal by this ratio. So if I'm set to 2:1, I wish it wouldn't do that. There we go. It's set to 2:1, then, and my threshold is set to 0 dB, then when my input signal is anything below 0, nothing's happening. When my input signal hits 1 dB, 1 dB, 1 above 0, my output is 0.5. When my input is 4, my output is 2. It's always exactly half because it's a 2:1 ratio. And a lot of people believe the expander will do exactly the opposite, meaning that when you're above the threshold, it will expand by this ratio. So if your threshold is 0 and your input is +2, your output will be +4? No, that's not what it does. That's technically that is an upward expander. Maybe a more accurate name for that would be a speaker destroyer. That type of expansion, unless it's part of a noise reduction circuit, is just going to blow things up. It's not going to have a happy ending no matter what happens. The expander inside is what's called a downward expander. A downward expander. And what that means, notice that the threshold in the compressor only goes down to -30. The threshold in the expander goes down to -80. The expander is actually designed to function down here in the Netherlands, down in the bottom area of your audio region, because the expander compresses signals below the threshold and leaves them alone above the threshold. The whole point being, so we have a background music program, and our noise floor, if we turn off the background music and just listen, Let's say our noise floor is at 70 dB, and I'm picking that number just to have an easy number to deal with, okay? And our mandate is to make sure that the background music never falls below X dB over the noise floor. Well, what's X? Depends on the environment, depends on the speaker system being used, how well you can hear things, that sort of thing, what volume you're playing it at. But let's say we've been told by the facilities director, I want to make sure that the noise, the background noise, the hum and hiss, never gets within 30 dB of my program material. All right, no problem. The noise is at 70, so we'll set the ratio or threshold at 40. Oops, sorry, meant to put in negative 40. Set the ratio at negative 40, or threshold at negative 40. My ratio is 2 to 1. So what's going to happen here is when my input signal drops by 1 dB, the signal is going to be compressed by 2 dB, basically. So for every dB it drops, it's going to be pushed down 2 dB, which means when my audio signal drops to negative 41, the whole thing gets pushed down 2 dB, which pushes my noise signal down to negative 72. When my audio signal is all the way down to negative 60, 20 dB below, my output's been pushed down 40 dB. So my noise is pushed down to negative 110 dB. So it's actually spreading the distance between your noise floor and your background music as your signal dithers away and fades off into silence. It allows your signal to fade off into silence instead of fading off into hiss and hum. So in reality, an expander isn't so much a variation on a compressor as it is a variation on a gate. A gate and an expander do almost exactly the same thing. And by the way, can't do them all at once, I forgot. They do have side chains on both the gate and the expander, and yes, you can do some cool stuff with those, triggering one signal off another. The gate and expander do almost exactly the same thing. They both have a threshold. Let's say that we had used the gate in our previous example. You know, our noise is at negative 70, and we've got this background music that's fading away. How are we going to use a noise gate to make sure we hear the noise? Okay, there's really no good way to do it, but let's say that, okay, we'll put the gate threshold at negative 50. At that point, we're only 20 dB above the noise floor, so we're kind of not really following our mandate. So, all right, fine, we'll say negative 40. What's going to happen? When the signal drops below negative 40, the gate's going to push it down by this much. Well, to get the same net effect as the expander, how far are we going to push it down? We've got to push it down beyond the point where it's audible. We've got to push it down to at least negative 110. Absolutely at least negative 110. So let's go ahead and say 40 dB of reduction. Well, the problem is this 40 dB of reduction is going to happen as soon as we hit negative 40 dB. It's going to pop it down. Sure, I can set my attack to something nice and slow and hope it really doesn't become too noticeable. But if I set my attack to 1 second, close enough, and the song is doing a fast fade out, we're going to hear that background noise for half a second. If I set my attack to half a second and the song's doing a slow fade out, we're going to hear the noise gate kill the music. So that's a situation where an expander is actually probably the better thing to use, because when your music is fading out and it hits negative 40, nothing happens. At negative 41, a little bit of change is made. The output is down by 2 dB. At negative 42, it's down by 4 dB. At negative 46, it's down by 12 dB. Everything is in small increments as the music fades out. All it's doing is making your fade a little faster once you get past negative 40. So in a lot of situations where we would habitually reach for a noise gate, an expander is really the better option. It's a better processing object to use than a noise gate. And just out of curiosity, I've never actually checked what the, I don't know why I deleted all three of them. I've never actually checked what the processing object costs. Let's go over here and turn off our meters. I said no, thank you. Turn off our meters over here. I should have put a blue 16 in here, that's what I should have done. Let's do that real quick so we can check our utilization of DSP power on these processing objects. Blue 16. Let's get as close to empty as we possibly can. Okay, base floor is, where's my cycles? Here we go. 2.4, 4.1, yep, 3.2% utilization with nothing going on. So let's throw a noise gate in there. And noise gate's going to cost us not quite 3%. Not quite 3%. The expander should not be any more expensive, but I've never checked. Let's find out for sure. It's less expensive. A little less expensive than the gate is, actually. So it's a more efficient processing object, in addition to probably sounding better. Depending on what your source is and what you're trying to accomplish, the expander will probably sound better in your application. What else do we have here? We have a ducker. And a ducker is, again, kind of the same toy. Kind of doing the same thing. And so is the limiter. The limiter is, in some cases, you can consider the limiter to just be a compressor on steroids. But there are some substantial differences in how you can set the controls. Because what's a limiter? A lot of people say a limiter is a compressor with the ratio set to infinity, right? Well, yes and no. Notice the release time on your limiter. You can back the release time on the limiter off to 1 millisecond, as opposed to 5 on the compressor, which you may not think is a big deal, but it makes a huge difference in music. Whether you want to capture that spike or do you want to capture that spike plus the next 5 milliseconds. 5 milliseconds is a long time if you're listening to a piano chord, or if you're listening to a crash cymbal ring out and it's compressed for 5 milliseconds. It's a long time. So that's the difference between the limiter processing object and the compressor processing object. The other difference being that the limiter is, I'm not even sure how to describe this. The limiter is a little bit more abrupt than even an infinite ratio compressor, because the limiter is designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that is stop the audio at the threshold. Okay, it's going to be a little bit more aggressive than even an infinite ratio compressor will be. That doesn't make any sense, I realize that, but if you run a music signal into it, and more importantly, run 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different musical signals and listen to them, I guarantee you'll hear the difference. Absolutely guaranteed to hear the difference. The limiter is going to clamp down the signal more effectively than the compressor at infinite ratio is. And it shouldn't, but it does. Always does. Now, the ducker is a funky little toy. What does the ducker do? Compared to a compressor with the side chain turned on. What's the side chain, or a compressor with a side chain turned on does what? It compresses this signal based on the level of the second signal. What's a ducker do? A ducker turns down this signal, first signal, based on the level of the second signal. Very similar objects, really. When the mic input, the second input, gets above the threshold, the ducker turns down the signal by this much. It's kind of the opposite. It's similar to a compressor with a sidechain turned on, and in some ways it's exactly the opposite of a gate with a sidechain turned on. Because a gate with a sidechain turned on is going to turn down this signal by the range when this signal is below threshold. Ducker does the same thing, but does it above threshold. They're all just variations of the same concept. They're all variations of the same little bit of tools. They're all modifying the signal based on their own threshold or somebody else's threshold. Important note about the ducker, what does the ducker do? The ducker turns down signal 1 based on the threshold of signal 2. When signal 2 is above threshold, it turns down signal 1. I didn't say anything about mixing the two signals together, did I? If we have a ducker in our system, wired up just like this, am I going to hear signal number 2? When I turn that mic on and talk into it, and the background music gets ducked by 70 dB, am I going to hear the microphone? Nope. Not going to hear it. It's a ducker. It's ducking. If you want to hear that microphone signal, you have to go to Properties and turn on the optional mic feed to output mixer. Turn that on, yes, and now you'll hear the microphone. Turn it off, we're at 5.8%. Turn it on, we're at 6.3%. So turning on that little mixer does cost us something. That's why it's not turned on by default. We're trying to save processing power. You guys can ask questions. You're allowed. What have we not looked at yet here? We have not yet looked at the leveler. Boo. The leveler is a great way to blow things up. It's awesome. There are stereo versions of all these that work exactly the same. Compressor, ducker, expander, gate. We're not going to look at those. We haven't looked at the ambient noise compensator, and we have not looked at the non-gap ambient noise compensator. What does the leveler do? Okay, on the leveler, first of all, you set a threshold. Below that threshold, the leveler does nothing. Okay, so you're basically saying, knock it off, leave my signal alone, don't mess with it below this signal, or this threshold. But if I've got, the whole purpose of the leveler is to try and take whatever you give it and make it all match, make it all the same. But the cool thing is the leveler can go up and down with its audio signal, not just down like a compressor. So we can set the leveler to 5-to-1 ratio. And let's say we're doing background music. And to make our lives easy, we'll say that our target output is negative 10 dB. I can change this, but let's leave it at negative 10. I want the background music signal to average negative 10 dB. Okay? If my ratio is, actually let's turn the ratio down. 5-to-1 is pretty drastic. 2-to-1 is more subtle, and it actually becomes a useful device at that point where it's not so in your face, trying to make things crazy. If I set my threshold to negative 15, I'm telling the leveler, don't do anything below negative 15. Sorry, I'm smoking crack here. Let's make that negative 20. There we go. Saying don't do anything below negative 20 dB. Once we get to negative 20, then we go ahead and use this ratio with a maximum of 10 dB of gain and try and push that signal up to negative 10. If we get above negative 10, try and push it down to negative 10. So below it, we try and push it up. Above it, we try and push it down. If I set this threshold further away from the target than the max gain, then I get some kind of weird, funky happenings. Because what will happen is, let's say I put this at negative 40. As soon as I hit negative 40, boom, it pushes up to negative 30. And then I'm stuck with the normal volume variations until it gets up to negative 10. So it becomes really just a 10 dB gain boost as opposed to truly trying to level the program material. You want to get your program material to a fairly even range. You know, you want to all be between 0 and negative 20, for instance. and then try and push it all to -10. It's not a magic wand of any sort. It can only do what it can do, but it does do it very well if your program material is reasonably close to be the same volume. In reality, most of the stuff we deal with these days is so compressed and overprocessed, it's all going to be within 2 or 3 dB, easily, very easily. So if you set the leveler something like what you see here, it's going to work great. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. Now, the only time it gets kind of weird is when the song is fading out, or if the song is fading in. That's what the speed control is for. Longer settings on the speed control become dangerous because you might have a boost in gain, and then the volume of the music pumps up, and now you got a huge hit of volume. Really, really short speeds are dangerous because now the level's going up, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, 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 up, down, down, trying to change the volume constantly. And it screws up the music. It sounds horrible. So based on the style of music you're doing and what its dynamic range is, you have to set that by ear, really. There is no definite answer. It's usually, I'm saying usually, not always, usually higher than a second, and it's usually almost always lower than 2.5, but it could very easily be anywhere in there and have it sound great. Depends on whether you're talking about orchestral stuff or pop music or, you know, beer barrel polka, whatever you have going on. Now, because the leveler increases the gain of your signal, do not ever, 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 for any reason, use a leveler without putting a limiter right after the signal chain. It's just suicide. It's just silly. The leveler can turn the volume of your signal up by up to 20 dB, depending on what you have this set to. And if you have it set, you know, worst case scenario, 20 dB and 10-second response time, you could have a 20 dB boost in gain on a leveler that ignores volume changes that don't last for at least 10 seconds. So the input volume goes up for 5 seconds, a 20 dB boost on it, the leveler doesn't care. It came down before the 10-second time was up, what do I care? So always put a limiter after it because it's a great way to blow stuff up. It really is. All three of these are a great way to blow things up. Ambient noise compensator. Cool toy. There is a whole section in the help file on how to set up the ambient noise compensator, by the way. It gives you step-by-step, do this, do this, do this, do this, walk through how to set it up. The long and short of it is, we wired up here with our background music going through it and a microphone wired in right here. And that microphone is in our room somewhere, just hanging out in the room. Okay? Could be up in the ceiling, whatever. Anytime the background music drops below this threshold for a period of time at least equal to this, then the ANC will listen to, the ambient noise compensator will listen to that microphone. And the microphone appears on this meter over here, and it compares the microphone to this threshold. And it uses that comparison to decide, okay, is the background noise in the room loud or quiet? If the noise is really quiet, it's down here, then it turns down the volume of the background music. If the general noise is really loud with no music, because again, we're in a gap right now, there's no music, then it turns up the background music. Very cool processing object. It works phenomenally well. Works really, really, really well. If you get yourself in a situation where your background music source does not have gaps in the audio, a lot of the Muzak and things like that have seamless audio now where you don't have any fade out from one song to the next, it just crossfades. That would be the non-gap ambient noise compensator. Move that up here. There we go. Works pretty much exactly the same way, except it's listening all the time, which means you have to kind of be careful with your mic placement. It's not as hard as it sounds. Your mic placement is not as complex and weird as you might think. But you do have to make sure you're not putting mics right next to speakers, obviously, or you'll get bizarre results. All right? A little sip of my beverage there. So those are the dynamics processing objects. Those are some of the more exciting objects. So things are going to get boring from here. Oh, kidding. We'll be fine. What else do we have? Does the mic... Yes, that's the whole point with the non-gap ANC. The microphone does pick up the background music, but there's no fancy magic going on inside this device, by the way. It works exactly the same way the gap one does. It's listening to the background and comparing it to a threshold. But the point is, in most situations, your crowd noise is still above your background music noise. Whether it's a diner or restaurant, whatever, your crowd is still louder than the background music. If the background music is louder than your crowd, then you can't talk to the person next to you. Yes, it's hearing the background music as part of the ambient, and that's why you have the ratio attack and release here to try and control it a little more carefully. And it's a little more difficult to set up, but it's not bad. It's not that tough. And a lot of times you can also cheat, because remember, you've got, let's move this guy out of the way. Just because I illustrate it like this doesn't mean we can't slap a big fat EQ or a crossover for some heavy duty filtering before that signal goes into the ANC. So we can take this EQ and let's just, anything below 200 hertz, gone, dump it. Anything above, I don't know, pick your poison, 6K, 8K, what's the point? That's not people noise, that's music. Dump that. So you can tailor that audio a little bit to make it a little more useful. And since I brought out the EQ, we'll look at EQs next. We'll go out of order here. There we go. Get out of there. We have the parametric EQ, the N input parametric, the graphic, and the N input graphic. The parametric EQ is a 1-band to 12-band parametric. Starts off as 12, you can turn those off, save yourself some DSP power, and have as few as you want. All the way down to making it into a single-band EQ if you want. Now the parametric EQ has some cool little tricks to it that you don't know about, one of which I guarantee you don't know about. Unless you're taking my class, I don't think there's a person on this planet. There's a chance, this might even be news at your own. When setting up tunings on EQs, the biggest pain in the rear is that manufacturers can't make up their mind. The speaker manufacturers can't make up their mind. Do they want to specify the tunings based on frequency and bandwidth? Or do they want to specify their tunings based on frequency and Q? And it seems to me like every time I go on a job site, it doesn't matter who made the speakers and who made the processor. I've got a sheet of paper in my hand that says one thing and the processor does the other one. Every single time. Sound of London does both. Over here under properties, nothing. Parameters, nothing. We don't see Q anymore. All we see is bandwidth. Where's Q? Where's Q? It's not over there. This is one of those features that we had to sneak in at the last minute. We barely got it included. Graham was able to just slide it under the wire basically for us. If you go to the enter data field for width on your EQ, see where it says 1.00 oct? If I go over here to properties, well, that's selected. If I go to properties and look under units, the units in which to display the value, I can change that from default to Q. Now, I can also change it to a bunch of stuff that's just dumb and makes no sense, but I can change it to Q, which is actually useful. And now our width is displayed as 1.4 Q. Technically it's a Q of 1.4, but you get the idea. Now I can enter that information as Q instead of bandwidth. If you've ever had to try and do the conversions, that's a huge thing. That'll save you some time. That's true of both the parametric and input parametric. Any place with a width for a parametric, you can go over to properties, change it to say Q instead of octave. Okay? And again, the parametric can be up to 12 channels, or up to 12 bands, sorry. The N input parametric, there is no stereo parametric, because there's an N input parametric. The N input parametric, just like the regular, has up to 12 bands, and then it has a variable number of channels. How many channels? Well, it's not 9,999, but it is 32. What in the heck are you going to do with a 32-channel EQ, where you're applying the exact same curve to 32 different channels all at once? Well, the answer is we have no idea. That's why we didn't bother to make it 48. But when we were the 16 channel, I thought, I could maybe see it being more than 16. Maybe. So it became a 32. You can set it for however many channels you want. It's very useful for doing general tone shaping on surround sound systems. If you want to just have a tone control for the end user that allows them to, boost and cut by 3 dB certain ranges, but you want to boost and cut in all the channels, not just the center channel or not just the stereo channels, because that would be kind of bizarre. We also have the graphic EQs. I said graphic EQs. There we go. Graphic EQs have a couple of funky features to them also. First of all, always keep in mind, if you're going to use a graphic EQ, you're going to pay the price. Right? They're not cheap. They are resource-sucking pigs. Because there's 31 filters here, for Pete's sake, or 30 filters here, for Pete's sake. You can set the graphic EQ for 30, 15, or 10 filters, whatever you need it to be. But there's still, if you have a 30-band graphic up there, man, it's 30 filters. Have a nice day at the beach, because that's sucking up a lot of resources. Especially because, most of the time you end up with your 30 filters in like the traditional frat house smile. What are you going to do with your graphic? 9 times out of 10, it ends up looking like this, doesn't it? It's got, when you're all said and done, your 30-band graphic has the Dolby X curve on it, for Pete's sake. All right, we're done. What, you couldn't do that with a 2 parametric? Come on. Now, you might have noticed the response curve. A little yellow thing I got going on there. The gray curve shows you that particular filter. The yellow shows you the overall response of the EQ in its current setting. I can go over here. Where is it? Show all filters. If I click on this display and go show all filters, it'll show me the individual filters all the time, not just when I'm playing with them. But this overall curve is actually very useful because it helps you to visualize what the hell the selectivity is over here. What's the point of this thing? Broad, narrow, huh? It's adjusting the Q of the filter, which actually technically is not correct. I accept that. Yes, that's a misnomer, but that's what we always called it, so we're saying it's adjusting the Q of the filters. If they're broad filters, the summing is very smooth. If they're narrow filters, the summing is not so smooth. So if you're trying to do nice big general curves, you probably want to set to broad as opposed to narrow. If you're trying to use that graphic as a specific tweak, you might want to set to narrow instead of broad. Totally up to you. Hope you guys can see those changes happening. Here they are. Okay, that's selectivity. There's a flat button and a bypass button. I used the flat button before. Be aware they don't do the same thing. If you hit bypass, you unbypass. If you hit flat, you cannot unflat. Flat is flat. You're stuck with it. And if you want to, you can place this on a custom control panel and turn off the faders. So all you see is the response curve, which can be very useful. A lot of times you want to show the curve someplace as a reference so you know what's going on, but you don't want to give the opportunity to tweak the curve. The same is true with the parametric. We get into the parametric here, we can set this up. Where is it? That's not it. It's gone. I apologize. I must have been thinking of it from sound designer instead of London architect. With the parametric, we're going to have to lay something transparent over it so you can't tweak the response curve. But with the graphic, you can just turn off the faders. And then it's pretty hard to move the faders when they're not there. The N-input graphic is just like the N-input parametric in that it does not have 9,999 channels. It only has 4. Alright, so I lied. Maybe it's not just like. But think about that. 4 channels? Holy moly, man. That's 120 filters. It's a lot of DSP resources being sucked up there by one processing object. You cannot do a one-channel N-input parametric or N-input graphic. Why not? I don't know. Because Graham said so. It's one of those fun little rules. Any questions on the EQs? Oh, I forgot to show you one more thing. On the parametric, normally you click on it and you're adjusting the amplitude and the frequency. And if you watch, let's go over here where you can watch it. When I get to negative 15 dB, it automatically kicks over to being a notch filter. Now, while you're adjusting this, if you hold the shift key down, now you're adjusting the width of that filter instead of the amplitude, which can actually be phenomenally cool and useful for when you're tuning a system. You start off at 1.41, wrong way, 1.41, and you're just, okay, here we go, where's my, do a big boost, where's my icky frequency? There we go. That's where it sounds icky, right there at 1.3K, okay. Bring it down, bring it down, bring it down, bring it down, okay. Doesn't sound horrible anymore. Now, let's start shrinking the bandwidth and see how tight we can get it before it starts sounding horrible again. There we go. So we're cutting out the least amount possible. That's just holding the shift key down to adjust the bandwidth. That also works on SoundWeb Green, in case you care. Just in case you're interested. In the mixer section, you know what? The mixer section includes the auto mixer. Let's hold off on that because we only have 8 minutes before we're supposed to take a break. Let's do something quick and easy, and then we'll take a break and come back and do the auto mixer and the room combiner and all the fun stuff. Because I know it's what you guys are dying to see is the auto mixer and room combiner, right? So make you stay through the commercial break. We'll take a look at the modulator, the summer, the FI filter, and the delay real quick, which means delays and primitives. And actually, if I'm going to look at the modulator, I need a meter. Okay, first of all, the delay. There's a lot of delay. A lot of delay available in SoundWeb devices. This puppy maxes out at 19 million. Oh, where's my number lock key? Why isn't it working? 19 million milliseconds. No, it doesn't really. It actually maxes out at 2.7 seconds, I believe. Why is it? There you go. 2.72 seconds. 2,720 milliseconds. Why does it max out at 2.72 seconds? It maxes out at 2.72 seconds because the shark chips, the DSPs, they have a fixed number of pathways between the chip and the DRAM, which is used for delays. And that number of pathways divided by the total amount of DRAM equals 2,720 milliseconds. So in other words, by setting them to 2720, if we max them all out, if we max out every delay and have the maximum number of delays allowed, what do we have? We have the full amount of DRAM utilized and no more. So basically we can't goof it up. It's impossible to overrun the DRAM this way. That's why they're each limited to 2720. And how many you're allowed to have, you know, I can't remember. The maximum number is, it's at least 48, and it might be 64. I don't recall. It's a big, silly number. I mean, it's just stupidly large. And interestingly enough, that's actually not, that's the maximum number of delay routes that are to the DRAM, but the shark chips can do small amounts of delay internally. So you often find yourself with more than that, and you're thinking, how did that happen? So the shark chips are cheating for you and giving you a little more space to play with. The only thing really cool about the delay, move that down here. The only thing really cool about the delay, beyond the fact that it is an N-input device with 9 million inputs, or 16, you can delay up to 16 channels by this same amount. The cool thing to me is that you can enter your delay time in feet or meters. If you're doing an outside show someplace and you got delay towers, you know, halfway across the cricket ground you have delay towers for the music. How far is it from the main speakers to the delay towers in milliseconds? I don't know. How far is it from the main speakers to the delay towers in feet or meters? I can find that out. I've got a tape measure. No problem. I go trucking out there, I measure it. Okay, it's 114 feet. Cool. Click down here. 114 feet. Well, that happens to be 101.208 milliseconds. That's so convenient. If you're not doing live stuff, this is not that big a deal. You know, but it's so convenient when you're doing live stuff. Oh my gosh. So that's the delay. Not much to say about a delay. The summer. What's a summer? Believe it or not, I'm not going to make a Seasons of the Year joke. A summer is a mixer with no controls. This is a 2-channel mixer with no controls. Everything's at unity gain. Have a nice day. You can't mute anything. The summer has a couple of bajillion inputs, 32. So you can sum 32 things together at unity gain. More useful than you think. But that's all there is to it. I mean, it's boring. There's nothing to the summer. FIR filters. You can have up to 600 filters, yes. Up to 600 coefficients in the FIR filter. If you don't know what an FIR filter is, don't worry about it. It's one of those things, it's like you get a whole separate merit badge of geekdom when you understand FIR filters. It's basically a way of creating filters that are very phase coherent, I guess is a good way to put it. They don't screw the phase up, even though they do massively bizarre filtering at times. You can have up to 600 coefficients, and you can do, I don't know why it says click button to edit. It's click button to view, and you can also import them from a comma-separated value file. So you can set up your coefficients in your regular software, spit them out of the CSV file, load them up, you're ready to go. Again, if you don't know what a FIR filter is, don't worry about it. It's not that important. Now, the modulator, the space modulator. What the heck is this thing? Okay, a modulator takes, and by the way, control panel? Not so much. Anything adjustable under properties? No. It's a brown box, man. There's nothing you can do to change anything about it. It's not controllable, it's not adjustable, nothing. What good is it? The modulator takes this signal, it modulates the amplitude of signal 1 by the amplitude of signal 2. In other words, the louder signal 2 is, the louder signal 1 gets. Now, there's one small problem. If you do that with a pair of AC signals, and audio is AC, that's what the A stands for in AC, audio. No, I'm kidding. If you do it with a pair of AC signals, you're going to get distortion, and just horrible distortion and noise. So you need a DC signal. Well, where are you going to find a DC signal inside a digital signal processor? I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with the meter. The meter has an optional property called Enable Control Output. Enables control, non-audio, output signal. Why this little help thing can't just say DC, I have no idea. But if you turn that on, you get a DC signal out the output of the meter. Since when do meters have outputs, for Pete's sake? Well, this one does. So by sticking the meter in there, now you've got a DC signal, and now the volume of this signal, the real volume of that signal, is going to control the volume of this signal. Pretty cool, no? The most common, is that true? Yeah, by far I'd say the most common use for this is surround sound. And trying to control multiple channels of surround sound with a real-world tone control. Like if you have a LCR, left, center, right system, or a 5.1 system, 7.1 system, whatever, we can wire it up like this. Oh, come on. Big fat fingers, little bitty mouse. Come on, we can do this. There we go. If I take a mixing console, let's say I've got a 32 channel console, I'll run a tone generator into channel 32, take the direct output of channel 32 and run my DSP. It comes in here, it hits the meter, becomes DC, and drives all three of these. So now that one fader on my console is controlling all three of these volumes. Or all 6 if it's 5.1, or all 8 if it's 7.1, or whatever. Okay, that's what the modulator does. The modulator, again, it's a great way to blow things up. So you might want to stick a limiter out here. Wouldn't be a bad idea. Modulators can do nasty things if they're overdriven. And again, don't play around with a modulator with AC going into it, because it produces hideous distortion. And not the good kind. It's not like you're going to plug your guitar in and wow the world with this sound. No, it's just evil, ugly, nasty digital distortion. And second, it's not a toy. Don't do this. I don't remember if we ever got that trapped out so it won't work or not. But you do not want to try and pass this control signal out of the device. Once upon a time, either the digital cards or the analog cards, can't remember which, would pass that signal, and it's a bad thing. Okay, so don't. Behave yourself and don't do that. All right? We are going to take a quick little 10-minute break here because I'm out of beverage. We can't have that. And give you guys time to stretch your legs. Let's see, where's the... There it is. There's only one R in the word break. And no I's. Funny how that works. Set for 10. Hit OK. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, voila. There's a little poll down there. You can ignore the poll. The time limit is set for 10, so the little blue timer is counting up to 10 minutes. When that gets to 10, I'll meet you guys back here, and we'll do the rest of this stuff. See you in 10 minutes.